Good morning. It's an honor for me to be here in Pécs. I've been many times to Hungary. It's my first time in Pécs. I have heard a lot about the city in reason of its efforts in adult education. I think the Institute for Adult Education is very well known at the European scene. So it's a pleasure to be here for the first time and see with my own eyes what is happening in the field of adult education in this university and in this city. I am from UNESCO's Institute for Lifelong Learning. And one of the times I was here was when Hungary organized the preparatory conference for Confintier 6, for UNESCO's World Conference for Adult Education, which is only organized every 12 years. And I congratulate Hungary with being the host country for the preparatory conference. We're very soon going to have a follow-up conference in some country in Europe, and we are discussing with governments where it could be hosted. UNESCO is working with lifelong learning because UNESCO has 5 functions. The first function is to be a laboratory for new ideas. Try to inspire governments, member states, civil society with discussing, negotiating, creating, developing new ideas who can move forward the learning society. The second function is to be a clearinghouse, trying to support member states with research which can build evidence, can build on good practice, good examples, in order to create better models, build the evidence base, built on research, but also by disseminating the research results to member states, communication policy. The third function is to be a networking agency, trying to establish partnerships, to create meeting places, to create fora where new network can be established and become new stakeholder for development. The title of my presentation today is a new research agenda for lifelong learning in the light of developments in the European Union, in the Asia-Europe meeting, and in UNESCO. And let me start by pointing to some changes in the outside world which sets the conditions for what we are trying to establish from the inside of education. There are some new changes in the world at the world level, but also that have, all of them, I think, effects at the regional and at the national level. The first one, demographic shifts. All countries in the world, all regions in the world today experience the demographic shifts. One of the consequences is that in some countries we see aging societies, we see a rise in life expectancy rates. In other countries we see a little rise in life expectancy, but we see a very big rise in birth rates. So we can see that we are now reaching the 7 billion people mark. We are now about 7 billion people in the world, so we have a very steep rise in the number of people on the planet. We see societies with almost no increase in the number of inhabitants, and then we see new, very young countries where there are many more young people than older people. Europe belongs to the aging societies in this rating. Latin America and the Caribbean are in the middle. Africa is the young continent. The second new change is natural disasters. We see both nature-made and man-made natural disasters that are getting a new influence on policy development. Not least climate change, but also disasters like in Japan, not so long time ago, have created a situation where all new policies are trying to relate to this overall change. We also see an unequal development and widening gaps in the world, in the regions, and also at the national context. The gap between rich and poor people is not diminishing. In general, it is increasing, in spite of all the efforts for the opposite. We also now see that ICT is changing in a dramatic way social relations among people and their work conditions. And finally, the financial crisis has consequences in most regions of the world, most notably in Europe and in Northern America. If we take our point of departure not from the inside, what are the challenges, the opportunities from inside of education and learning systems and policies? What are we focusing on at the national strategies for education, learning, lifelong learning? But if we try to look at what are the new demands that are changing the world and to which we need to create active responses, then I have just pointed to 5 external factors that influence our systems for education and learning. And now I will point to one of the consequences of these challenges, and that is a new demand for documentation. It has become the order of the day that we have to justify, to legitimize the new policies for lifelong learning, to prove that they are efficient, effective, to respond to new external demands. One of the responses in relation to new demand for documentation we see in PIAC, the new OECD study for measuring adults' competences. This is an exercise that is not trying to do advocacy for adult education and learning, but is trying to measure the competences that adults have in relation to the demands in the labor market. The overall title could also be a new skills strategy. The second is a new focus on functional literacy. It has become evident that with new challenges, we need to have a workforce that is qualified, and we can see that many people cannot access lifelong learning because they cannot open the door for lifelong learning, and the door is literacy. If you cannot read and write, cannot calculate, you cannot continue in continuous education and training. So there's a new focus, especially in Europe, on functional literacy. And you will know that in many European countries, there's a very high level of adult functional illiteracy. A recent study in Germany pointed to a number of 7.5 million adult people in Germany who are functional illiterate. And the percentage is more or less the same in recent studies in the United Kingdom, Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and in the Netherlands. The third effect I'll point to is a new focus on technical vocational education and training on one hand, and on the other hand on higher education. Europe is now trying to see how can we respond to the financial crisis. And so far, the new signals are to focus more on higher education. If we can have more people get a university degree, 40% of all populations in the European area, then we will be highly competitive. And for the remaining 60%, we should focus now on developing a high-quality technical vocational education and training system, the TVET system. The question is, what about the rest? What about all the classical non-formal sector, civil society, voluntary organizations, NGO work, and so on? There's a very big pressure now in order to be able to document the efficiency of systemic responses to these challenges on higher education and on TVET. And finally, at the European level, I'll point to a new focus on young people. With the shifts in Europe now of the labour market, as you will know, in general, there's a very high unemployment rate amongst young people. I think in Portugal it's about 25%, and in Spain it's more than 40%. And this, of course, has given a new focus also in European policies on young people. And I think one of the ideas is that with more mobility, also at the labour market, but also the educational market in Europe, where young people circulate, they will have better opportunities for finding a job. But if you will read some of the new policies, you will see that the focus on employability, on the job situation, has become strengthened in recent policies. The European Union have, for I would say a decade, had a focus on 4 pillars for lifelong learning: learning for employability, learning for social cohesion, the active citizenship, learning for personal development, and also learning for social inclusion. The order, of course, has been to develop the inclusive society with room for everybody, including of marginalized and people who are impeded in participation, also with the unemployed. What we see now, I would say, is what I just described, as a very strong focus on TVET and higher education in order to respond to the need and the demand for learning. What we see from the side of OECD now is the skills forecast. The new PAC study can be seen as one big exercise for doing a skills forecast and trying to match the competences that now will be measured in relation to the skills needed at the European labour market. If we try to respond from the side of lifelong learning, we would say, yes, TVET is a very important pillar in our educational learning system. Higher education, extremely important. It's also important that if you start in the vocational education and training sector, you can continue to higher education level. You can also go across. You can create a system which is partly influenced by lifelong learning philosophy.